Well, welcome everyone to the CGHE webinar with Yusuf, Ikbal, Oldac. And Yusuf is going to talk about tectonic shifts in global science, US-China scientific competition, and the Muslim majority science systems in multipolarizing science. So it's a big picture look at the science system and the way Muslim countries are becoming a more important factor and in a multipolar environment. Before I introduce Yusuf, who's a valued colleague, I'll just take you through the webinar protocols. Now, happy to introduce to you Yusuf Ikbal Oldac. Yusuf is a Hong Kong Research Grants Council postdoctoral fellow at Lingnan University in Hong Kong at the School of Graduate Studies. He's also a core Centre Fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies in the same institution. His research, he's beginning to develop a range of things, I think, Yusuf. He researches international and comparative higher education in the context of globalization. His specific areas of interest include global science, which he'll talk about today, international students, which he's written about and which he did his doctoral work on, and student agency and self-formation, which was part of his doctoral work as well. You can follow him on Twitter, and that link is on the website that advertises this particular webinar on the CG website. So, Yusuf, the screen is now yours.
Thank you very much, Simon, for this nice introduction. Let me just share my screen. Just give me a second. Okay, share screen.
Yes, we can do that, Yusuf. That's good.
It's full screen. And can you hear me well as well?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So yes, as Simon also mentioned, today's topic is tectonic shifts in global science, US-China scientific competition, and the Muslim majority science systems in multipolarizing science. So I'm not going to introduce myself because Simon already did. I'm thankful to be here. It's a very nice group of colleagues. So let's get to the research, to the substance part. So global science is witnessing unprecedented transformations. After World War II, only a few science systems in North America, Western Europe, the Soviet Union, and to a certain extent, Japan and East Asia sustained most of research and development endeavors. This phenomenon has tremendously changed in the last decades. After the establishment of the internet in the 1990s, instantaneous collaborations and global networking among scientists have become possible. This event has led to the development of increased collaborations overall, but especially with the United States, the leading science system since then. Thus, more and more scientists around the world from middle and low-income countries have increasingly collaborated, networked, and embedded themselves into the US science. The main competitor in global science at that time was the Soviet Union, but its dissolvement occurred concurrently with the advent of the internet. This event was a big development for global science. However, global science is going through yet another tectonic shift. China has globally built the world's most productive science system, surpassing the US since 2018. China-based scientists published more journal articles than the US-based scientists in 2020 as indexed in the Web of Science database, and they extended their lead in the year afterwards, which is the latest available data at the time of writing this paper. The speed of growth distinguished Chinese science system from others, as China only accounted for 5% of all scientific publications in 2000. China is now leading the world in a few fields, including mathematics, in terms of citation recognition, and is the second science system globally when looked at aggregated citation recognition. Thus, the world is experiencing an increasing multipolarity in science yet again. The increasing multipolarity in science due to the rise of China is said to have implications not only for the science systems immediately surrounding it, but also science systems around the world. Global science is a complex network system. In science, collaboration and competition occur simultaneously. As the competition in science is now fully global, so is scientific collaboration. Competition, collaboration, duality in science occurs simultaneously at individual, institutional, national, and supranational levels. Although each level has a significant role to play in science, the intensifying competition, collaboration, duality worldwide shifted the scholarly attention from national level to the global. Hence, this paper investigates the competition between the US and China by analyzing their collaboration patterns with 6 major Muslim majority science systems. The more 6 selected science systems collaborate with these 2 science giants, namely the US and China, the more they are influenced by and in interaction with them. These selected Muslim majority science systems are a fast-growing group of science systems which differentiate themselves from all other Muslim majority science systems in multiple metrics, as identified in a previous paper. In alphabetical order, they include Egypt, Iran, Malaysia, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. Here is the reference to the previous paper. It was published in Scientometrics a few months ago, actually. So, positionality is important, and I'd like to start with that. Muslim majority countries are sometimes subjectively named the Middle Eastern countries. However, a quick investigation of these countries that share cultural and religious similarities will explain that they are not all located in a single geography. Now that science is multipolarizing, another subjective terming could be used for these countries by those with an Eastern gaze, Eastern Asian gaze, as the Middle West. And with the same perspective, the United States becomes far west, quote unquote. So either use is incorrect, best to use objective terms. So I include this discussion to present my positionality. In this research, my perspective derives from Amartya Sen's idea of transpositionality in investigating the US, China, and the 6 selected Muslim majority science systems. As a researcher who has lived in both the Western and Eastern parts of the world, and originally being from Turkey, I do not take any perspective as given, and my approach is grounded in critical realism. Social relations exist prior to our knowledge, and the goal is to explain these phenomena using empirical data. This paper is developed within the field of higher education studies that interprets the science in the selected science systems in global social theory. The science system and the higher education system of a country are not the same. However, they are critically related. Most scientific research globally is still conducted within higher education systems. So now to theoretical premises. Global science is multiscalar. That's one argument of this paper, and which is I'm not the first one saying it. Various actors are involved in science at multiple scales, which include local, national, and global scales, as identified in a seminal paper by Marginson and Rhodes earlier. Nonetheless, science is not limited to these scales, but also includes actors in the regional, institutional, and individual scales. Actors in science space are constantly active in more than one scale and are always in organic interaction with each other. The largest scale in the science space is global scale. Global science has mostly developed in the last 3 decades. It was largely made possible by the emergence of the internet in the 1990s, making instantaneous communications and networking possible in the global scale. It is a dynamic network of scientists and all other actors at various scales in the multiscalar science. Global science expands to include all possible connections, which explain the rapid and open character of its growth. As these actors, including scientists, national science systems, or institutional actors, as these desire to augment themselves, they also contribute to global science. In this sense, a symbiotic relationship exists between actors in science space and global science. The relation is primarily a positive sum. The national scale also plays an important role in the multiscalar science, and it is a relevant scale for this study. Wagner and colleagues argue that the national science system operates orthogonally to global system, highlighting the interaction between the two, but at the same time, the qualitative difference. The national scale has the nation state as its normative center and is run by nationally coordinated regulations, laws, funding, and norms. In contrast to national scale, global scale does not operate in a normative center, although some nations hold more central positions than others. Another important difference is that national science is funded by governments for the competitive advantage, prosperity and security of nations, and always for the knowledge and not always for the knowledge's own sake. By contrast, global science mostly operates through increasingly pluralizing but still unequal networks of science actors in a fluid manner. Scientists almost always have two roles: contributing to the national science, but at the same time contributing to the global science, especially if their work is published in outlets with international readership. The sciences develop internationally, but the funding is mainly national. That's a good example for this. So, one important thing is the symbiotic relationship in place between national science and global science may or may not occur among nation-to-nation scientific relationships. This possibility depends on the nature of how these systems are steered by policymakers and, to a certain extent, other actors within them, such as individual researchers and research institutions. Science can be a positive sum phenomenon. An example is, once scientific knowledge is published and out there, preventing it from spreading is not easy. Most people can benefit from it, including the actors in global science. This idea was a main discussion, one of the discussions in Hess and Ostrom's book on knowledge as commons. Wagner also discussed this topic and argued that science may not always be a common good. Patents and firewalls are hindering access to main scientific outlets, and the scientific jargon used by specialists are hindering the factors for science being beneficial to everyone. Such arguments indicate that science can also be a zero-sum game, depending on how it's positioned. The recent ongoing scientific decoupling between the US and Chinese science systems can be seen as an example of how once collaboratively positioned science systems can increasingly turn their collaboration into a competition. These two national science giants immensely contributed to global science while their science systems were positioned in a collaborative spirit. However, the collaborative spirit in science between the two is increasingly changing. Scientific collaborations and the networks built over the years by scientists do not cease to exist overnight, but the trend is there. So let's talk about Muslim majority countries, which the study also focuses. So every 1 in 4 people on Earth, which is around 25%, is estimated to be Muslim, totaling up to 1.94 billion, according to 2021 data. The majority of Muslim population live in the Asia-Pacific region, 62%, followed by the Middle East and North Africa, and then Sub-Saharan Africa and Europe. The fact that most of the Muslim population are living close to China's immediate surrounding influence zone creates particular significance to this study. Although Muslim population comprises a significant portion of the world society, not many studies focus on their scientific contribution to global science. Muslim majority science systems are rapidly increasing both the quantity and quality of their scientific publications. The scholarly literature would benefit from more data-informed scholarly discussions on them. This suggestion is not to necessarily treat them as a separate group, but to better understand their contribution and role in global multiscalar science. The use of Muslim majority term is to acknowledge that these countries are not inhabited by Muslims only. In fact, most of them are diverse communities with minorities from different backgrounds, and all are valuable. So in this study, as I mentioned earlier, I will follow a previous recent study that I shared, and you can see these countries listed in this table. The table here provides the bilateral international co-authorship index values among the selected science systems. These co-authorship index values are calculated by the National Science Board of the United States. A value of 1 indicates an expected level of collaboration corrected by system size and overall global collaborations. Thus, any value above 1 indicates a higher than expected level of scientific collaboration between the two science systems. As the table indicates, nearly all the bilateral collaborations between the selected systems are above the expected level in 2020, confirming that all of these countries are closely cooperating with each other. The only exception is Iran's collaborations with Saudi Arabia and Egypt, potentially due to geopolitical rivalries. Iran is still highly connected with all other systems, as you can see. The cultural and religious proximity shared among these countries could be a reason of the high scientific interaction and cooperation among them. It is worth noting that the selected countries do not share the same language, except for Egypt and Saudi Arabia. So although the use of same language is discussed in the literature as a potential factor facilitating international research collaborations, this does not seem to be the main factor among the selected countries here. And there may be other details happy to discuss later. So in this research, I take an agential lens to multiscalar science systems. All actors at multiple scales highlighted in the previous section may agentially work towards augmenting their scientific capabilities in an unequally grounded global science space. National scale is one aspect of this consideration, as national science systems globally invest in their science systems and build a scientific infrastructure to improve their scientific publications, both in terms of quality and quantity. Congruent with this idea, Muslim majority science systems are also agentially investing in their science systems, which result in increasing scientific outputs. As the figures demonstrate, funding is an important tool through which national science systems support and steer their scientific endeavors. Allocating funding to research from the limited budget of nations requires an agential decision by the actors involved and almost always results in capacity building and other research publications, although the efficiency of science systems varies. So all the selected Muslim majority science systems have more than tripled their scientific publications since 2010 in their total paper publications, internationally collaborated publications, and domestic collaborations. Regarding international collaborations, all the selected science systems have more than quadrupled their collaboration, so collaboratively published papers, except Turkey, which was already a relatively larger system among the selected systems. Higher levels of international collaborations are associated with low capacity and a way of capacity building for some studies. Building on these arguments, determining with which system this dramatic increase in international collaboration is happening in the multipolarizing science space needs further investigation. Global scientific expertise, location of labs and equipment, and global flow of funding steer the actors at all scales, including individual scientists and local actors. This situation especially includes individual researchers. With the rise of Chinese science system, the world science has more options for choosing their collaborators, capacity building activities, and source of funding. So this study used bibliometric data to address its research purpose. Bibliometric data are increasingly used to investigate the international collaborations and publications of national science systems. The study builds on more than one bibliometric data source and included data synthesized from the Web of Science database and National Science Board data, which uses Scopus database. Data obtained from Web of Science were collected using Insights interface and include journal article metadata from all Web of Science indices, including emerging sources citation index. This index was included to be more inclusive as the selected systems are emerging systems. Data obtained from National Science Board includes journal article and conference proceeding metadata for science and engineering research areas. These databases are the most frequently used data sources for analyzing scientific publications globally. However, no data source is fully perfect. I acknowledge that not all scientific publications are included in them, and that those excluded in these databases are by no means less valuable. I also acknowledge both databases still seem to favor papers published in English and journals based in the Western part of the world, although there seem like a gradual change in this. A scientific collaboration between two science systems means that at least one author from each country co-authoring a paper together. Discipline-based collaboration analysis rely on OECD categorization, which we will see in detail soon. So now to the findings. So this slide provides an analysis of the scientific co-authorship trends of the 6 selected science systems with the US-based versus China-based scientists. We're going to go into more details, but I wanted to give you a broad picture first. For one, collaborations with both the US and China are happening on an increasing trend. However, the natures of the increase are different. The increase in the collaborations with China resembles more of an exponential increase, especially in the last couple of years, whereas the increase in the collaborations with the USA indicates a more steady increase. And there are more co-authored publications with China than the US in the latest year. The US has gradually lost its position as the top collaborator of these 6 selected science systems in total numbers, as these selected systems diversify their scientific cooperation endeavors and publish more. So to analyze the level of increase in the collaboration patterns, the table provides nation-to-nation research collaboration pairs and the change in the number of collaborative publications between 2010 and 2021. The data synthesized in the table show the astonishing level of increases in scientific collaborations with China. Half the selected countries had more than a 30-factor increase in their collaborative output with China, while the other half all had more than a 10-factor increase in collaborative publications. So the minimum is 10-factor with China. By contrast, none of the selected countries reaches the increase of 10 factors in their collaborations with the US. Also, whereas the average value of increase in publications from 2000 to 2021 for the US is 5.17 times, the same value for China is 24.54 actually. So there's a really huge changes towards collaboration with China. Moving from the trend data to current situation of scientific collaborations in 2021, a 3-to-3 split occurs among the selected countries in their scientific collaborations with the US versus China-based researchers. On the one hand, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Malaysia are collaborating more with China. On the other hand, Iran, Egypt, and Turkey are collaborating more with the US. The strength of the collaboration selection differs from system to another. Pakistan is the system that is invested the most in Chinese science system, with a significant difference from all other selected systems and also compared with its collaborations with the US. This finding is consistent with the enormous investments by China on Pakistan's scientific and technological infrastructure, along with investments in other domains which have led to a long history of close relationship between the two. The US has no such level of investment on the scientific and technological infrastructure of Pakistan, and instead has developed a positive relationship with Pakistan's regional rival, which may be arguably pushing Pakistan's scientists to collaborate more with China-based scientists and seeking Chinese funding for their research. There are more to talk here about other countries too, but let me leave them to the upcoming paper. I have time limitation in the presentation. So let us talk about discipline-based collaborations. The discipline-based analysis also supports the argument of multipolarization in science space. The table summarizes the discipline-based collaborative paper publications of the US-based and China-based scholars with the 6 selected science systems in 2021. The total values for each discipline indicate that China has a higher number of collaborative paper publications than the US, with the selected countries in the 3 out of 6 areas: natural sciences, engineering and technology, and agricultural sciences. By contrast, the US has more collaborative papers with the selected countries on the other 3 fields, namely medical and health sciences, social sciences, humanities. In other words, a 50-50 split occurs in discipline-based collaborations when viewed at research areas in total numbers. Another noticeable pattern from the data is that while Turkey and Iran collaborated more with the US in all discipline areas, Malaysia and Pakistan collaborated more with China in all disciplines, except in medical and health sciences. Among these 4 science systems, Iran's strong collaboration patterns with the US rather than China are interesting, given its overall geopolitical stance against the US. This scenario is a potential indication that scientists and scientific endeavors may not always align or follow national level policies and stances. It's the agency of scientists. The broader patterns are also visible from the discipline-based analysis. 2 of them. Firstly, China has a STEM-heavy science system when viewed from the discipline-based total collaboration patterns, which is known to most of us who research Chinese science. Secondly, some disciplines seem to be more collaborative in nature than others. For example, the total volume of collaborations for natural science is much higher than that of humanities. This also is known to those who study science of science, actually. So these 2 broad patterns are in line with the literature, in short. Let's talk about who bears the larger responsibility and initiative in these collaborations. In each collaborative research project, a party or person typically bears larger responsibilities than others. The literature indicates that first authors tend to assume larger responsibilities than others. Additionally, corresponding authors also undertake larger responsibility than other collaborating authors and tend to be the first authors. The main logic behind the analysis provided in this section is that first and or corresponding authors are more likely to have a larger responsibility in research. In other words, higher percentages of first and corresponding authorship in the collaboration analysis of country pairs could have implications about preferential attachment in collaborations, a concept discussed by Wagner. To illustrate, the majority of collaborative papers between Iran and the US have Iran-based scholars as their first or corresponding authors. This scenario could indicate that Iranian-based scholars may be actively seeking to collaborate with the US-based scientists, given that the Iran-based ones seem to have the initiative by being lead authors in the collaborative journal articles. This argument builds on the center-periphery nodes in the science theorization, whereby nodes, researchers in the more peripheral positions would want to collaborate with nodes in the more central positions. The initiative in research analysis based on first and corresponding authors confirm this argument. This metric alone cannot explain the whole collaboration phenomenon, I acknowledge, but it can shed some light onto it. So coming to the table, here we see several interesting patterns. The average percentage of first and corresponding authorship by the selected science systems in the nation-to-nation collaborative publications are higher when collaborating with the US than with China. This finding could indicate that the scientists based in the selected Muslim-majority science systems could be seeking to collaborate with US-based scientists more than China-based ones. However, the comparison of the 2010 and 2021 average values indicate that preferential collaborations with the US decreased in the latest available data than a decade earlier. Regarding collaborations with China, an increase in terms of corresponding authorship is apparent from 2010 to 2021. By contrast, no system has a majority first or corresponding authorship percentage in their collaborations with China-based scientists. This absence may be due to several reasons. Firstly, China could be taking a proactive role in increasing its research connectivity globally as a rising science giant. Hence, China-based researchers could be the first authors in collaborations with these countries. Secondly, which does not contradict with the first, China has STEM-heavy science, which may result in many author-intensive papers. Consequently, the first and corresponding authors could be based in a third country. So this is the last finding slide, and then we move to discussion. We talk about citation recognition here. Citation data do not necessarily indicate research quality, but are a good indicator of epistemic recognition. They denote that a publication is recognized and responded to by another published paper, whether the citing site supports or criticizes the arguments in the cited paper. In this section, category normalized citation indicators, also called as CNCI, are used to gauge the citation recognition of the collaborative papers published by the selected science systems in collaboration with the US and China. CNCI is a normalized value provided in Web of Science based on publication year, research area, and document type. CNCI value of 1 is a normalized to be the world average. For example, CNCI value of 2 would mean that a paper reached double the citation recognition of world average in its research area. The table synthesizes the national average CNCI values of all papers published by each of the selected science systems. Most science systems demonstrate CNCI values close to world average, while the US and China science systems demonstrate higher than world average CNCI values. Saudi Arabian science is also higher than world average, potentially due to its international collaboration-heavy science system, which was an interesting finding in my previous paper that I mentioned earlier. The main finding in this section is that compared with the national average CNCI values, those of international collaborations, see the figure here, are significantly higher and are all above the world average. So it doesn't matter US, China, they are all higher than world average. This finding echoes the literature that international collaborations increase citation recognition. I use the concept citation premium to highlight the additional citation recognition received for international scientific collaborations. The data here indicate that papers collaboratively published with China-based researchers has consistently higher premiums than papers collaboratively published with the US-based researchers. For example, as a system that traditionally collaborates more with the US, Turkish scientists enjoy more than thrice the world average CNCI value with its collaborations with China. In this analysis, I excluded papers with extensive authorship, just to avoid inflation and citation recognition as well. That's a side note I wanted to add. So, conclusions and discussion. Let's conclude the paper because I know I'm also running out of time. The paper investigated the competition between the US and China in their scientific influence on the selected Muslim majority science systems through multiple bibliometric analysis. All the analysis consistently demonstrated that US is losing out its scientific influence with major Muslim majority countries to China as global science multipolarizes. The selected systems demonstrated an astonishing increase in their scientific collaborations with China-based scientists in the last decade. While the US also increased its scientific collaborations with the selected systems, the rate of increase in the collaboration with China was exponential, especially in the last few years. The latest available full data, 2021, indicate that the selected Muslim majority science systems started collaborating more in total numbers with China-based researchers when compared to US. These trends echo the overall discussions about the meteoric rise of China in global science arena. China has now developed the most productive science, as we just discussed. Although their citation impact is still lagging behind that of the US when taken separately as national averages, the patterns indicate that they may catch up with the US in this metric as well. Such a rapid growth of Chinese science in the last decades has an impact on global science, as the findings of the study confirm. The selected 6 Muslim majority science systems already collaborate highly among each other, as demonstrated earlier. These countries do not share a common language except for Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and they were not all part of the same colonial entity in the past. Yet they collaborate at higher than expected levels. This paper argued that these countries share cultural and religious proximity, which is leading to increased scientific interaction and collaboration among them. However, although they seem to be high collaborators among each other, their collaborations with the 2 science giants, the US and China, demonstrate differing positions. Overall, there was a 3-to-3 split among the selected science systems in their collaborations with the US and China-based researchers in 2021. While Malaysia, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia collaborated more with China-based researchers, Egypt, Iran, and Turkey collaborated more with the US-based researchers. These results are illuminating in that scientists may not constantly follow the overall policies and geopolitical stances of their countries. For example, in Iran's situation, while scientists collaborate more with the US when compared with China, Iran's overall geopolitical outlook shows an opposite pattern. Iran has been in a geopolitical rivalry with the US and even recently signed a memorandum to join the China-led Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This situation is a potential indication that scientists and scientific endeavors may not always align and follow nation-level policies and stances. This finding echoes the arguments on the strength of personal networks in international collaborations and loyalty to the scientific field before anything else. Marek's argument on the importance of prestige-seeking of individual researchers is also relevant. The agential lens also has an explanatory power here. Agency in science space is multiscalar. Agential actions could occur at the national scale to steer the course of scientific endeavors of a nation, but these actions have a limit. Agency exists at the individual scale as well, which can sometimes go against the impositions of the larger scales. These findings confirm the multiscalarity of agency in science space argued in a very recent paper by Simon Marginson, but he does not take the individual's level as a scale. I take it as the smallest scale in the science space. Another important finding of the study was that scientific collaborations with China is not only better in terms of quantity, but also in terms of citation premium. International collaboration with either the US or China increases citation premium overall, confirming the literature. However, the study went beyond this scenario and demonstrated that scientific collaborations with China, when compared with the US, garner higher citation premium for the selected country systems at least. The difference is big for 4 out of 6 systems. The analysis for all measures demonstrate a clear pattern of moving away from a single pole in global science. Chinese science system is moving up fast and gaining increasingly more space from the US science system. However, the future remains uncertain for two reasons. I'm going to finish my slides with these two reasons. Firstly, the US is losing its scientific influence on the selected Muslim majority science systems, but this may not only be due to the meteoric rise of Chinese science. The US has also, to some extent, quit its international connections due to anti-globalization trends and domestic-focused agenda in foreign relations in recent years. This trend may have deterred its international research collaborations. If such an international outlook is reversed, the overall patterns in international collaborations may also start changing. And secondly, China has closed itself to the world due to COVID for over 2 years. And is only recently opening up, whereas the US science and most Western science systems already back to their normal routines. Considering Wagner's argument that scientific collaboration networks establish after initial personal contact to build trust, China's closing down of its borders can potentially put a significant blow to China's research connectivity with the world. However, the effects of this possible scenario are yet to be seen in the mid to long term, because already established networks will continue to help China grow its collaborations with other countries in the short term. Thank you all. These are my references. Yeah, so there are many references. So you can contact me with these emails and Twitter accounts. Happy to answer your questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. That was really interesting data and really well presented, I might say. And I think your point about agency in the scales not necessarily being in synchrony is really significant. That scientists, individual and groups of scientists, may be doing different things to their nation states at any given time, and that relationship also varies by country, so that in some countries science is more autonomous of the the foreign policy of the nation than in other countries. I'm not sure if COVID-19 is going to have a substantial long-term effect or medium-term effect in relation to China's position. My sense of COVID-19 effects have been perhaps a bit over-talked, and we are seeing patterns generally springing back in higher education and knowledge to where they were prior to the pandemic if they were disrupted. But that's probably a bit early to call that, isn't it? I'm not sure if the US pattern is much due to the anti-globalization trend. I think that's true in relation to China. I mean, we are seeing a downturn in the collaboration numbers between US and China. That's certainly due to the decoupling strategy of the US government and the growing tension between the two countries. And that's playing out in science and technology. But I think in other respects, US scientists are pretty keen to maintain their worldwide influence and their role. We haven't yet seen evidence that there's a turning away in the scientific communities, to take your point about agency being, in science communities often being different to nation states. Time will tell, of course, whether the US becomes much more insular, and that may play out in the end in higher education as well, but we'll see. In relation to the data, I mean, I thought you alerted us to how important Iran and Turkey both are, their size of their science system now, reflecting their large populations, of course. But, really they are major players, both of them. You also alerted us to how large and important China-Pakistan collaboration is, and how much, as you say, how much investment's gone into that. And the US-Iran pattern is interesting, isn't it? Because I think that reflects a much longer trend, going back some way. And there's been a lot of reaching out from Iran as well as from the US. And even though there's been a rocky last decade, prior to that, there was more effort being made. My question, I've got two before we bring in 3 people on the list. 2 questions. What about Indonesia? I think Indonesia's numbers are just below Malaysia in terms of total output, and Indonesia is growing really fast. Have you seen anything there? And the other question is, have you got anything on publication of science in national languages other than English? Have you seen anything in Muslim majority countries that will tell us how large the national language database is?
Thank you very much. Thank you. So actually, I was expecting a question on Indonesia. So I believe Indonesia has a huge potential. And also has a great population. So if correct policies are taken, and if these scientists are supported well, that country will have immensely more and more, scientific contributions to the way we see the world, the global science, etc. But currently, it's not achieving its full potential. That's what I observed in my latest journal. But you're right, they are going very up quickly, and I think in time they will, at least in number of publications, will be higher than Malaysia. But the thing is, we have to follow all the metrics. Usually citation recognition comes a bit later. So for example, if they pass Malaysia, they will pass with numbers first, and then with citation recognition, we will see how that, we will follow it. So the general idea is that the country has a huge potential, the science and everything, but it's just recently beginning to achieve that potential. I think that's how I think about Indonesia. And maybe in my future papers, it may be not 6 Muslim majority countries, maybe 7, if Indonesia, as we expect it to be, continues to grow. Mm-hmm. And then their own language. So this study did not focus on that topic directly. But what I observed from the literature is that these countries are actively promoting people to publish in these databases that I used. Many publications within these countries, they talk about this, the policy direction. They are promoted, how can I say, if they publish in Web of Science or Scopus. That is the thing. But I haven't checked, for example, Arabic publications, and we need to see if there's a database that we can look at that. The thing is, all these have a different language, except Egypt and Saudi Arabia. That's another thing to consider for that question, I think. I can say about Turkish science system, there are many Turkish publications going on, but with these policies of supporting these international databases, the most everyone sends their best research, whatever, to these Web of Science or Scopus cited or recognized journals, which may or may not be good for global science implications. I think can be discussed in a separate discussion.
Thanks, Yusuf. Now we go to the discussion amongst the participants, and I'm going to ask Altaf Kadir to come in first. I think Amit Bali is not going to ask a question, but you might want to keep an eye on what Amit has been saying in the chat. And then after Altaf, I'll invite in David Mills, but let's start with Altaf now. I can see him coming through on the screen.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you, Yusuf. Wonderful presentation, and your data is multidimensional, which is very interesting. I have a question. Dr. Abdus Salam, a Nobel laureate in physics from Pakistan, he emphasized on science education from the early years. So some countries, for example, IP and Kiel in Germany, they have a research center about science education in schools, like junior grades and high schools, so starting research from then about science education because they are the future scientists. Is it possible to apply this idea of research on science education for youth and kids at the international level and also for Muslim countries?
Okay, thank you for your question. So science education idea, I haven't followed this specifically, especially the case happening in Germany, but I guess why not? I would say if there is a will from the nations, the policymakers, they should. And I think the earlier the students will be exposed to this, probably they will be more prone towards science, at least in science literacy terms. But I am not sure if I was able to answer your questions, but I think it may make sense and it may help people developing their proneness to science.
Good. I'll send you email and we can talk further, and let's elaborate and apply this maybe.
Of course. Let's talk about this. I have a few other friends who are specifically working on this topic. I may also be able to connect you with them.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks, Altaf. And David Mills is next.
Hi, Yusuf. Yeah, fascinating. Great data. Really interesting what you've done. I too am fascinated by this growth. And when you talked about 10 times growth in collaboration, it sort of seemed unreal, doesn't it? And inevitably, we're also seeing is, some publishers just absolutely having that exponential growth in the number of journal articles they're publishing. So at that level, the data's not wrong, but I guess I'm interested in the artifactuality of it. And the challenge of a word like collaboration is that, you're including any attempt at linking an author to another author as collaboration. And clearly there are, in a context of a lot of pressure and of, precarity in academia and expectations about international publishing. And I would say that international publishing is coming at the cost of national science systems. I think that is, I don't think you say it's a zero-sum game internationally, but I ought to say it was sometimes at the consequence of national science. But my question really more is around, how does one allow for the fact that some of this is noise of the pressure to find someone to author with, and I only have to look at the mass retractions that have happened from Web of Science and Scopus journals to know that that some of these articles are not serious sort of research collaborations.
Okay, so I guess you're asking more about the pressures about collaborations, and they may be artificial, some of them.
Yeah,
I think so. That's a very, very good question. Thank you very much. Like, for example, when you think about, we should also maybe talk about regions in this. For example, some regions like Africa or some other South Asia, etc. There are artificial pressures to collaborate, and it's not just there, but from my observation, it may be more in percentage there. So this artificial collaboration, I guess that seems to help with promotion in the position, etc. This is something that happens, and we have to acknowledge it. It is there. But I also think collaborations do not always happen artificially. There are two coins of this. Sometimes it's great to learn from each other, especially in my publications. If they're with international collaborations, I learned a lot as an early career researcher. But the artificial side of it is there. And just today, I read a paper. It was saying in medical sciences, they even, I guess, sell authorship in them because it's, especially in medical sciences, they have maybe 100 authors. So in that situation, if you add just by paying, no one notices. So there's those practices, and we have to acknowledge. And it was actually the case, for example, in my previous paper, when I was looking at just the overall publication patterns of these countries. Some countries, specifically Saudi Arabia and Qatar, seems to have high percentage of it because they have double affiliations with international co-authors. But we cannot pick countries here because I've seen this is done in, for example, global north countries as well. For example, France. Yes, some paper I read it happening in France and others. It may be a higher percentage happening in some others. But the answer to this, I mean, there is artificiality, and with this data, there will be some of that as well. But not all of them will be so. And it's very hard to distinguish them. If it's artificial, I mean, very hard. So maybe it's an acknowledgement as a limitation of the methodology, I would say.
That's great. And that's really helpful. And yeah, I totally agree. There's lots of very real collaboration as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for highlighting this. Simon, you're muted.
Oh, you're muted.
Isn't that terrible? I do apologize. I'm going to ask you to focus on Alil Cohen's question now, Yusuf, because Alil's not able to speak in the webinar, but he's happy for me to read out his question. He says, there's clearly a lot of value to analysing these trends through the lens of multipolarity and competition between the giants. But is there anything lost by using this lens as well? Or are there any alternative theories that highlight different causal factors at play?
Okay, so I think in every research or in everything in life, when we focus on some theories, you always do not focus on others. When you focus on some data, you always do not focus on other data. Of course, in this study as well, maybe the data could have been explained in other ways as well. But from my point of perspective, the way it's explained with, for example, agentic lens, etc., I think they hold a strong explanatory power. For example, if you have any alternative explanation ways that you'd like to share with me, I'll be happy to maybe have a look and read further into this. But this is also a very large, picture happening, the collaboration between two research giants, multipolarity. I am pretty sure there are other ways to look at this data as well. But the way it is, I think the current theoretical perspective also holds a pretty strong explanatory power in my perspective. Happy to learn more if you share some. I hope I was able to answer.
As I've said before, I mean, the problem always is that we look at data in terms of national identity. And often institutional identity is just as important. And certainly field, epistemic identity is more important than anything for many people. So to understand the patterns, we say, oh, it's global as well as national and so on. But in the end, we've got this national signifiers. They're our data sets, aren't they? So we end up talking about the global environment in terms of nations and through that lens. So it's difficult not to do that because that's the way our data are organized. That's the way that the field of science studies generally sees things, because it's providing information for nation states, resourcing their strategic development. And that, of course, has been part of the process whereby investment in science has risen, that focus on the nation state, but it's always a little bit misleading. And as you say, Yusuf, quite accurately, you look at things in one way, you can't look at things in another always. One lens usually will crowd out other lenses or will eliminate other lenses, and it's difficult to be multi-positional, to take in everything at once. Now I'm going to bring in Pola Lem. Very good to see you in the webinar, Pola. We really like your reporting. So many issues you're illuminating, I think, in your work for Times Higher. So would you like to ask your question?
Thanks, Simon, and thanks, Yusuf. Yeah, basically I've got a somewhat speculative question, but I guess I'm curious to hear what you think will happen next with these trends. I mean, obviously you pointed out that there's been this exponential growth and collaboration between Muslim majority countries and China. Do you expect that to continue? Do you expect the US to slip further behind China in its sort of influence on these countries? What do you think will happen in the next decade or so?
I think the way the patterns show us is that the growth will continue with both countries. China has surpassed in terms of total numbers. I think it may continue to keep that position. The thing is, China's population is very high, and if right policies are implemented, if all the scientists in them are empowered, they have a higher potential to do so. But some policies may create some uncertainties. So COVID-1 I mentioned earlier, but it's not just COVID. If policies about being closed or being turned inside, that happens, they tend to affect international research collaborations. Although if not very immediately, maybe later on in the medium term. Same with the US, I think it will continue. Another point why the research collaborations increase between them is actually the pluralization trend that we see. These countries, the 6 Muslim majority countries that I discussed here, they also publish more and more. So it's not just China increasing its publications. These countries are also increasing their publications. So their collaborations in terms of raw numbers will also grow. But maybe we may have a different point if we look at, let's say, percentage of collaboration between them, such as the data shared by National Science Board about index values, which is included in the paper, but I couldn't include them in the presentation. That one calculates the percentage and looks at the expected values. So currently, most of these countries do not collaborate with China at the expected level. They're still, even the number is going up, how can I say, exponential way. They are not at the full potential now. That is what it seems like. With the US, a few of them are, but again, not at the full potential. So according to that data, we again predict them to grow. But we always have to include this uncertainty about the major macro level changes, macro level developments. They may have an impact on how these work. Thank you for the question.
I might add some thoughts, Paula. I mean, to this
Simon is the expert on this.
ever fascinating conversation about who's the fattest fish in the pond. Is it the US or China? I mean, I think the thing we need to look at is investment, and there are two things about that that really stand out. One is that there aren't many laws in social science here, but there seems to be a close relationship between the level of government investment in science and universities and non-profit institutes on one hand. I'm not talking about business R&D because that's a very flaky data set, but public, what you might call public science, investment in public science and the output of science. Very good relationship. Correlations are very clear lots and lots of times when you look at national data investment data sets. And US has maintained under the Democrats, maintained its science budget. And I think there's every likelihood that US will remain very, very strong. And the only reason why the US appears to be diminishing or shrinking is simply the growth of China and East Asia and Iran and Brazil and India and the other players. They're taking up a bigger share of world science. That's inexorable. That will continue. US will seem to be shrinking in its share of high citation science, but US remains the strongest system in most disciplines and overwhelmingly the strongest in medicine and biological and allied fields. It's really the physical sciences where the patterns have changed a bit. And even there, the US remains a really big, important player that'll keep winning Nobel Prizes and so on. So the US is not diminishing. It would only be if the Republicans took power and ran a really hardline anti-university, anti-science agenda. It's possible, but probably unlikely because it would be such a lunatic position to take in terms of national interest. But, it is possible, but it's not happening. China, well, I mean, the second law is that investment doesn't show itself immediately. It shows itself over a 5-year period. Now, China's investment of the last 5 years still playing out. China's investment of the last 15, 20 years has been extraordinary. And that is all pipelining through the system still. So even if China stops increasing its budget tomorrow, its science will continue to grow for up to a decade more at a rapid rate. China's growth is going to end up with a much bigger science system than the US, not just bigger, but much bigger. But there are signs that the budget situation is changing. How long for, how much, it's not clear, but the economic position of China is more difficult at the moment than it's been for 40 years. And there does seem to be a freeze on some grants, some science and university funding developing. So we'll see what plays out there. But it's possible that the rate of growth will eventually slow. But I think there's no doubt that China will keep improving in both quality and quantity terms for quite some time to come. But they're both enormous fish, and their relationship will continue to be one of the keys to world science and technology, no question. And if they continue to decouple, we're going to have two different science and technology systems evolving in parallel rather than together, which will be a change. Now, we've got one more question from Alil. Unfortunately, Yusuf, though, we're going to have to stop. It's because I'm interviewing students, and I'm going to have to go to my MSc entry interviews at Oxford right now. Can I thank you very sincerely for a quite brilliant presentation of the data, and I'm really glad that although, because we're on strike in the UK, we fouled up the advertising for this webinar, that you, in fact, at the last minute, we got a lot of people to come in. And you had a very good discussion. And I'm sure lots more people are going to watch you on YouTube. So come back again when you've got more science data. I think there's a lot of interest in our webinar program in science data. Our next webinar, folks, is Golo Henseki talking about graduate skills in the UK, and that'll be a good paper. It'll be of international interest, I think, and that's next Tuesday, the 21st. Thank you all for coming today. Thank you very much again, Yusuf, and bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.